Our Bible this evening is found in 1 Samuel 23. 1 Samuel chapter 23. David escapes in the wilderness is how it's entitled, at least in this particular translation. Although you never know these days, there are so many updates to translations, even that may have changed, mightn't it? But that's what it says here, 1 Samuel 23. Then they told David, saying, "Look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are robbing the threshing floors." Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" And the Lord said, "Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" Then David inquired of the Lord once again. And the Lord answered him and said, "Arise, go to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand." And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and struck them a mighty blow and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Now it happened, when Abiathar the son of Abimelech fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with an ephod in his hand. And Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah. So Saul said, "God has delivered him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars." Then Saul called all the people together for war, to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. When David knew that Saul plotted evil against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod here." Then David said, "O God of Israel, your servant has certainly heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. Will the men of Keilah deliver me into his hand? Will Saul come down, as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, I pray, tell your servant." And the Lord said, "He will come down." And David said, "Will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul?" And the Lord said, "They will deliver you." So David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and went wherever they could go. Then it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, and he halted the expedition. And David stayed in the strongholds of the wilderness and remained in the mountains in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. So David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life. And David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a forest. Then Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God. He said to him, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that." So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went to his own house. Then the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah, saying, "Is not David hiding with us in the strongholds in the woods, in the hills of Hachilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now therefore, O king, come down according to your desire of your soul to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand." Saul said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, for you have compassion on me. Please go and find out for sure and see the place where his hideout is, and who has seen him there. For I am told he is very crafty. See therefore and take knowledge of all the lurking places where he hides, and come back to me with certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall be, if he is in the land, that I will search for him throughout the clans of Judah." So they arose and went to Ziph before Saul. But David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the plain of the south of Jeshimon. When Saul and his men went to seek him, they told David. Therefore he went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon, and Saul heard that. He pursued David in the wilderness of Maon, and then Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men went on the other side of the mountain. So David made haste to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were encircling David and his men to take them. But a messenger came to Saul, saying, "Hurry, come, for the Philistines have invaded the land." Therefore Saul returned from pursuing David and went against the Philistines, and so they called the place the Rock of Escape. Then David went up from there and dwelt in the strongholds of En-gedi. Amen. The Lord bless you. Wrong one. Oh, well. Yeah. Right. God is our escape. That's what it comes at the end of the passage, isn't it? They called that place the Rock of Escape. A remembrance of what had taken place there. Again, Andrea will have to excuse me, but I'm going to put the map up so you can get a bit of an idea for those of us who can visualize it, where these places are tonight. It's all around that area around Galilee. Again, and we're going around that area where David hid. There are places on the map there that you can see. There is Kelah, there is Ziph, there is Maon. That's probably better how I should have said it when I read it. And En-gedi. All of those places where David hid or we have contact with him. As we look at this passage this evening, let me begin with my introduction. That would be helpful. So I'm going to flick back. If you've ever boarded an aeroplane, you will have heard or you will have watched some safety announcement being explained. What to do in case of emergency. I doubt you ever heard this one, but it is a real one that was spoken out. Welcome aboard. To operate your seatbelt, please insert the metal tab into the buckle and pull it tight. It works just the same as every other seatbelt. And if you don't know how to operate it, you probably shouldn't be out in public unsupervised. In the case of a sudden loss of cabin pressure, oxygen masks will descend from the ceiling. Stop screaming, grab the mask, and pull it over your face. If you have a small child traveling with you, secure your mask before assisting them with theirs. If you are traveling with two small children, we suggest you think very seriously and rapidly and decide which one you love most. That's true. There was rather a lot of more humor that went on all the way through that, apparently. Of course, often always also included is this description of where the escapes are. You know, there's the escapes. Well, this was what one lady said as she was giving it. There are 50 ways to leave your lover, but there are only 4 ways to leave this plane. And she said those things. There is a long list of those, of different things. But David isn't trapped in that sort of situation, is he? I mean, it is a peculiar thing, isn't it, that we fly up in the air in a metal tube, sealing ourselves in with limited hope of escape if anything goes wrong. Not to put fear in you, but when you consider it in that way, it's quite a humorous thing, isn't it, that we dare to do that. And some of us have got relatives rather a long way away, so we've done it for a lot of hours, haven't we? But David's not in that kind of situation. He's not trapped in an aeroplane cruising at thousands of feet high looking for an emergency exit. No, his problems are far more down to earth. But in each one of them, David is left needing some form of escape. As we look at this evening, we see that God, let's get this right, God provided David's escape from Saul on 3 occasions. It only looks like 2, but there are 3 here. I think that probably the middle one, the one that we might miss by quickly glancing at, is probably the one we suffer with the most or need the most often in our lives. And so we're going to see these 3 escapes which God provides for us. We're not hiding out in caves this evening, but our circumstances sometimes can hem us in, trap us in such a way as we need an escape, and only God can provide it. The three are this: liberation when trapped, visitation when confined, separation when pursued. Liberation when trapped. As you begin the passage, David hears the news that the Philistines are back again, and they're there at Keilah. It's not very far away. There is trouble. It's north of where he is, but it takes him back into the area of danger. It is only 3 miles south of the cave of Adullam, or that area of Adullam. And so he will be going back to where he has just fled from. The Philistines are raiding. It's their usual policy. They bring everything with them, it seems, their livestock, their army, and they come at the time of harvest, and instead of harvesting their own crops, they go and gather the Israelites' crops, not from the fields, but on this occasion they're at the threshing floors. A bit like Gideon of old, they see the dust in the air, they know something is going on, they descend on it, they gather everything they can, and so they come. News then comes to David. We're in trouble. You could help us. He's been in that vicinity. He's been in that area. He's the man that somebody sends a message to go. And David's response is this. He inquires of God. A very sensible response, and we often find that with David. His first response is often inquire of God. God says, go, and I will help you deliver these people. But when David tells his troops what he plans to do, his troops are not quite so keen on this military strategy. They trust David, but they've been there before. They're in Judah, and they're not exactly getting a warm welcome there. And they're amongst David's countrymen there. But now they're going back to that area of danger, and they know it's dangerous. Someone could let Saul know at any time. If we're shaking here, they say, what will it be like if we go back there? So they're afraid. It will be too near trouble, David. So in front of them it appears to be that, because this is the casting of the lot. David inquires of God and says whether he should go, whether they should go. God says, go, and I will deliver the Philistines to you. So David and his men make that journey. They defeat the Philistines. It's only a short sentence, really. I struck the Philistines a mighty blow. I don't really know what that is. I think of a mighty blow as something which I never did it. I was never that sort of, I'm not that build, am I? Where you thump someone. But I've seen it done, and you strike them a mighty blow and they don't get up again. It seems that sort of thing. With his armies, they struck the Philistines such a blow that they weren't going to get up again, and they disappeared off into the distance, or whatever was left of them. And there is the situation. Of course, the people of Keilah are happy. They're grateful. You've just delivered us from the Philistines. We can gather our crops now without any fear. And David is welcome to stay among them in that place for a time. These are in a town, a secure setting. It's a place with gates, and it's a place with bars on those gates. So it also appears not only to have gates, it must have some form of perimeter around it as well. But just like those soldiers feared, the word comes to Saul. Somebody's reported it. David's done a good work, a great work, a kind work. He has put himself in danger, his men in danger, but somebody sees an advantage to Saul, so they go and tell him. David's locked up, he thinks. He's shut himself in, he's trapped himself this time. The boy's been a bit silly this time. And so Saul calls for backup. He asks for Israel to come out. They make their way, and they're heading for Keilah. But the word again comes to David. He realizes the danger is in. These two men must have quite a system of spies and espionage, of trying to find out what the other one is doing, because throughout this passage you hear that David hears, Saul hears. There was quite a system at work here. But as he hears that Saul is coming, David doesn't quite believe his ears. So he goes and he inquires again of God. We're told that in the meantime Abiathar has come. He has brought the ephod with him. He's already been reported. He's run to David because he's fled from the genocide that was happened through Doeg in the previous chapter. And as he comes, he brings this ephod. To us, it doesn't mean a lot, but it's a white linen garment with a pocket within it, or pockets within it, to contain dice, which were called the Thummim and the Urim. These dice were used to make decisions. Well, not to make decisions. They were to know the decisions of God. And so you would ask simple questions of God, and believing that God controlled the dice, which he does, they threw the dice to the ground, and the decision would be a yes or a no. That was the answers that came from these dice, how they were laid out. David asked the question, is Saul really coming? Yes, he's coming. Will the people of Keilah hand me over? Oh yes, they'll hand you over. So knowing this, of course, David escapes. We find, as it's described, it's probably an escape that isn't one way, but always for a time, as they depart out of Keilah any way they can, trying to cover their trail of where they have gone. It certainly seems to work, because when Saul hears that they're gone, there's no clear, determined path to follow, so Saul halts his expedition, or his group of soldiers that he's bringing. Well, there's your situation. There is David, he is trapped, and God liberates him. It wasn't David, he doesn't put it in that way here, does he? It was God's leading, said, Saul's coming, yes, they'll hand you over. So David then responds to God's word, and he goes. This type of situation is not uncommon amongst Christians in everyday life. You may know a strong-minded person who's known to despise the fact that you are a Christian. And because of the nature of that person, you will deliberately probably try and avoid them. Not that you dislike that person. You would rather like to win them over, but you know that there is no point at this stage. They are confrontational. They despise you for some reason, and you decide, therefore, it is in their interests not to give them the opportunity to continue to sin, but to avoid them. But of course, in a setting such as that, you are likely to have a mutual friend. You hear the mutual friend gets into trouble of some kind, and they turn to you for help because they know you can be depended on, and so you do. Of course, you would help anyone, even the person who would be confrontational with you, if they would ask. And once you've helped, of course, you feel a closeness of that relationship. I mean, someone has trusted you and wants you to be involved in their life. That is, until the other person finds out. They hear how you have stepped in to help this friend, this mutual friend between you. And they come into the situation and say, well, I'll tell you why they did that. I'll tell you what the purpose was there. And they try and undermine and try and ruin you in some way. That's quite common, isn't it? It happens at school. You have friends at school. In school, you've seen that sort of setting. You've helped someone, but yes, someone hates Christians or has a hatred against you, and they turn against you, and you feel it. There's a need to be escape. It can happen at work, in the workplace, as I described there. It can even happen amongst neighbors. A small locality, a few individuals, one person, for some reason, despises the fact you go to church or something of that. How do we escape? We need liberation. This situation and these situations, as we read it in the scripture here, reminds us that when we seek God's escape, we don't have to seek it when we get trapped. We can actually seek it before we get trapped. David inquired of the Lord when he heard the situation in Keilah, and he said, now, Lord, shall I go? Shall I go? We need to be aware at times that the very ordinary situations, the very needy situations, can sometimes be a trap set to trap us as Christians. Our enemy would draw us in. Anything can be used like that. David recognized this. He's been brought into an area that's dangerous. He's been brought near to a situation where he's already gone from once. Is this really safe, God? So the situation demands of us to know maybe a liberation even before we get trapped in that situation. There is no harm in praying before we get there. But if we become trapped in the situation which God has led us into, we have known that through prayer this is the right thing to do. It's the right thing according to the Word. This is good to do. We should do this as a good witness, maybe, as we witness to our neighbor, to our friend, as we seek to show them in practical ways the love of God. But then we become trapped. We may expect also then at those times that God will still liberate us. I don't understand fully what the need is, the specific needs of those situations are, but somehow we have to be extricated, don't we, in some way, so that we are brought away from the person who despises us, and yet we can maintain a relationship, a right testimony with the people we've been involved with to help. David came away from that situation. He avoided Saul, who was going to kill him, but he kept a right relationship with the people of Keilah, and in the future that would be so important because one day he was going to reign as king over them, along with all Israel. My dear friends, as Christians, when we find a situation like that, that is exactly what our mind is to be. Lord, these people now, they might want to hand me over. But there may come a point in their lives at some point where you will move in their lives and they will come to know you. And at that point, I don't want them to have a bad testimony of me. I want them to have a good testimony of what God has done. Liberation when trapped. David thought of this in the light of his future as well as his present. The second is the visitation when confined. Of course, running away and split up like they did, they have to have a place to meet. And there they go, running into the distance. They ended up in the wilderness of Ziph. At least that's how I pronounce it. As they come there, they regroup. These men come now, and we read this phrase a lot in these passages, they come to strongholds. These are places which people have used in the past to hide. Situations such as that which has previously been described, where the Philistines come. In times past, the Israelites went up into the mountains or into the forests. They made places to hide in, and they hid themselves away. So David goes to these places where others have hidden before him. Although Saul, has stopped his large-scale attack, he's probably sent several people home, he is still determined to find David. So determined, this is not just a passing fad, is it? It's his daily focus. I can imagine Saul sitting in his situation and wanting a word from each of his commanders. Right, what have you heard? Where is he? Have you any news today? And not only would he just hear what the news was, but he would move his camp accordingly to find out where he was. But he was so frustrated in that search. Every time Saul seemed to get close, we find that God did not deliver David. He could have the best information, the best setting, but he knew all the time God was against him. God would not hand him over. As David sees now, and he knows, this isn't just a one-off with a few spears in the house of Saul. It's not the occasional thing. Now this is Saul's determined focus in his life. He wants to kill David. David understands it. And so David has hidden himself away in this forest in the wilderness of Ziph. It's amazing, isn't it? Saul can't find him, but Jonathan can. Jonathan comes to him in the camp. I don't imagine that David was sending out postcards to David saying, well, greetings here from the wilderness of Ziph. I'm hiding away in the forest. I don't imagine that's the case, do you? David wouldn't have told anyone where he was. Only those men with him knew where he was. But Jonathan finds out. And Jonathan comes, and he comes with one intention in mind. And it says to strengthen David in the Lord. I like that phrase. He came. David was a strong man. He had swords, he had weapons, he had men, he had all kinds of things. But his need for strength was in one thing. It was in the Lord. And he wanted to strengthen him. His message is threefold. The first of all, don't fear. Don't fear. You can see you're in quite a situation here, David. My father has got quite an army. You've got a ragtag group of men. I can see they're quite an interesting crowd. As I've heard them described, they're the distressed. I see some of them, they're the discontent and all of this, and you've got them in your group. Do not fear, David. You will be king. God is going to keep his word. God has said and God has anointed you. God will keep his word. And David, I tell you this, even my father knows this. Even my father, who's pursuing you right now and trying to kill you, even he knows that God is going to keep you and you will be king. Do not fear. As Jonathan and David part company after this short time, of course, they renew their covenant again. The covenant before the Lord for one another, and we've no record of exactly what it said, only that they again repeat their this procedure of making a covenant, and Jonathan returns home. You know that? He returns home. He doesn't return to his dad. He's not joining in this useless pursuit of David. He goes back home. He goes to his place. And David remains in the forest. Even this phrase tells us a lot of the trust between these two men. David knows that Jonathan is not going to give away his location. He's not going to be running off and telling his father where David is. Such is the trust between these two individuals. David, when he is told by Jonathan, do not fear, he knows he has nothing to fear from Jonathan. In fact, Jonathan hopes one day that he will be beside David when David is king. You know, David was free in his body at this point, wasn't he? But he was confined, or he was limited in his movement and his freedom. He couldn't live a life of just anybody. He couldn't make himself known. He had to keep himself. He was confined. And Jonathan's visit in his confinement helped David's mind to escape that confinement. Because when the body is confined, often the mind feels confined. Confined by its circumstances. We see this ourselves. Many times we can feel trapped by our circumstances. We can feel confined at home. Some of you have known this. You've had a mother's life, as it was described of old. And the children came along and you loved them dearly. But couldn't I get out of these four walls once? The only time you seemed to get out of the shop was to shop for some nappies or to get some milk or to do something. Your life was not your own. You were bound to your children. You loved them, but to get out of here. And you feel confined. You can feel confined by illness. You have a prolonged illness. We can be confined in hospital. We can be confined in our home. We can be confined in so many ways with illness. It can confine us physically in our body. It can take away part of our movement, our abilities, and we feel our mind confined along with our body. We feel locked in our situation. We can't see the hills anymore outside. We can't see who created the world. We just feel locked in our own situation. We can also feel confined by age. It's gentle, it's gradual. But it's real. If you'd have asked Peggy how she feels about being 96 now, she would say it's not a great experience, and I don't suggest anyone gets this old. Because she feels confined by age. She sits in a chair, she looks out of a window, one day drifts into another. And yes, her mind is getting confused, but even so, she feels confined. And it's not just a confinement of sitting in the chair and sitting in the house. It becomes a confinement of the mind. Our enemy loves to try and take advantage of our thinking in times like this. And this is where Jonathan's visitation is so helpful. It is David's escape. It doesn't change his circumstances, but it takes his mind away from the immediacy of the problem to remember again what God is going to do. Sometimes it doesn't take a visitation, does it? Sometimes it just takes a phone call to bring someone out of their situation, to remind them that God has plans beyond the present. David, you're stuck here at this time. You're locked in this situation. But just remember, David, what has God promised to you? Remember the day that God came? You told me about it when God sent Samuel. Remember, he came to anoint a king. He looked at your brother Eliab. He thought he'd be brilliant. He was tall. He was handsome. But God said, no, he's not the one. He looked over all your brothers and he said of each of them, no, that's not the one. Remember your father was asked the question, is there any others? Do you have any more? Well, there's the young lad. He's out with the sheep. That was you, David, wasn't it? Remember how Samuel called for you. And when you came in, he made sure you were there and he anointed you. And what did he tell you? He said, you're going to be king. Remember what God has promised to you. He has plans for you beyond the present. He is not going to turn back on that word. David, I know this myself. You know I should be king. You know I'm the royal line. But you know myself, I have a peace with God over this. You are going to be king, and I'm quite glad to be your right-hand man and to stand beside you. But I know that God has appointed you king to remind people of the plans. What are the plans that God has for people? Old age, decrepitation, agony of sleepless nights as a mother, continual ravages of illness. Is that the plans of God? Where there is illness, there will be healing. Where there is age, there will be youth again. Where there is confinement of home, there will be such liberty that we could never imagine in this life. There is always a promise of God to point beyond the present. And these are the plans of God. And we can remind them that even their enemy knows this. Satan knows this. He knows that we are God's children. And God's plans are to prosper us, to bless us, and to do. And there is nothing our enemy can do about it. He pursues us with all his energy. He searches out all our hiding places. He may confine us under the weight of circumstances all of our lives, but he will never, never stop God's plan. This is what visitation does. A person confined is released through visitation when they are reminded of God. The third, the separation when pursued. Again, the people among whom David is have turned against him. Somebody's heard a twig crack somewhere, or something has been noticed, and Saul is duly informed. Maybe he's got a price on David's head. It's likely, isn't it? And so the word comes. Here's David, they say, come and get him. We'll hand him over to you. He's right ready. We know exactly where he is. Now, Saul has been here before. Saul had got all that army together and been heading for Keilah. So this time he thinks, let's wait a minute, boys. Let's make more thorough plans this time. Tell you what, go back and just check your information again, will you? Because you know, David's rather crafty. I have heard he's rather crafty. And what he meant by that, he knew that God moved him around a lot. And he said, check he's still there. Oh, and I tell you what, while you're looking where he is, could you also look where he might be if he moves? I'd like to know the other hiding places, the other caves, the other strongholds, anywhere I might find him. I don't just want to know the specific spot. I want to know a little bit about the battle plan around. Then I'll come. Well, of course, David knows he's coming. The Lord warns him somehow, and David moves again. But this time, Saul is close. Very close. Saul is so close that they can nearly touch one another. There is but a few hundred feet of rock between them, if a few hundred feet of rock between them at times. Saul's army are going down one side of the mountain, David's are going the other. But that isn't the only thing, because David is aware not only is Saul's army on the opposite side of the mountain, but he feels encircled. He feels that they're coming from all directions at him. David tries ever so hard to escape. He puts all his energy. You can imagine him marching his men hard, but quietly. He doesn't want to be heard. He doesn't want to be seen, but there is a swiftness, but he is unable to escape. He can't get away. Saul is breathing down his neck, and he is aware of it. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there comes a message. Saul, you've got post. The Philistines have arrived. Come and help us. Of course, Saul's got no choice. Do I chase after David, or do I go and fight the Philistines? Do I keep up my personal pursuit of this enemy of mine, or do I keep face with the people of Israel? He would rather keep face with the people of Israel, lest they should find out what kind of man he truly is. So he breaks off his hunt. As David breathes a heavy sigh of relief along with his men, they call the name of the rock on which they have hidden the rock of escape, as they realize that God has kept them separated while they were pursued. On two sides of the same mountain, God was keeping Saul pursuing, but also keeping David safe as he did this. I'm going to use a historical analogy for this in our history. Just in July this year, there was a big film came out called Dunkirk. By the title, you already know what I'm going to speak to you about. It was in Dunkirk on the 26th of May to the 4th of June in 1940, when an armada of small ships and boats pulled off a dramatic evacuation of 338,226 Allied troops. Within weeks, it was just the North Sea which separated between Britain and defeat in the Second World War. It proved to be an uncrossable barrier to the Nazi forces, and they hoped to beat us by attrition, cutting off supplies, taking over other areas. They thought they would never have to attack us, rather we would surrender. But it never happened, did it? Every year we remember the sacrifice of the men who fought in such times as that. But you know, there are few who really remember the miracles of the Second World War, when God separated between the forces that eventually brought liberation and those who would have crushed them. It was Churchill who entitled the events of Dunkirk, "The Miracle of Dunkirk." He was not a believing man in the fullness of what that means. He was certainly a man who knew what it was to pray during the war, but he was a man who understood this was beyond the realms of the possibility of a great plan. It was not the fortunes of war. It was a miracle. Dunkirk stands out in history like that, and there are other accounts from the Second World War and other times when we can see that. My dear friends, there are times when that happens in our own lives. It's just as if there is a mountain or a barrier that is uncrossable to our enemy, and they just cannot get through it. And God, though He pushes us hard and the enemy pursues us, keeps us safe. And at such times as that, it's important that we mark those occasions. That's why these men named that place. They wanted to mark what God had done. They marked it for themselves. Remember, because there's times to come when David will face this again. And they could tell one another the account. You remember when we were on the Rock of Escape? You remember we could see the dust of Saul's men on the other side? You remember we could hear their voices? Remember we heard the clatter of their armor? Remember when they were coming in all directions? And somebody came and told him the Philistines are coming. He had to leave us. And it encouraged them when they faced that again. But they also renamed it, or they also named it for the benefit of others. So that when they were pursued, when they were trapped, when they were in such situations, they might remember themselves, God is able to provide a way of escape here. He doesn't have to get us out of the situation. Sometimes He can keep us safe in the situation by separating us from our enemies. These are the three escapes, then, of this passage. The liberation when trapped, the visitation when confined, and the separation when pursued. But where do you escape to? David went from there and he dwelt in the strongholds of En-gedi. He escaped to En-gedi. We'll find in chapter 24 that it still was a place where he was pursued. As you read this passage, and I'll remind you what I said earlier, there were no new places for David to go and run and hide. There were only the tried and tested ones, the places where others had been and others had hid. They went and dwelt in the strongholds of Ziph. They went and hid in the cave of Adullam. They went and hid in the strongholds of En-gedi. These were the places where others had tried and tested. And so it is for us. There's no new places to hide, only the ones where they're tried and tested. The places where God liberates, the visitations when we are confined, and the other one that has slipped straight out of my head in that moment. All of those are there. There are others, of course, but these three do tonight. So when we are in trouble, when we feel hard pressed, let us escape to the tried and tested escapes of God. Let's pray. Lord God, we do pray for those this evening who feel themselves trapped and in need of liberation, confined and in need of that visitation. Lord, in all those circumstances they are in, that, Lord, you would be near to them, particularly those who feel confined. We do think of Peggy, we think of Carol, think of so many of our older folk. Think of Barry's wife this evening as he's come to us. Lord, you would be with them in their confinement. And through the visitations of your people and the encouragement of those who come to them, you would lift their minds beyond their circumstances, that they may see the God who will one day bring about the greatest escape of all, as we are released from the body and are present with the Lord. Lord, we pray that you would help each one of us in our circumstances as we are likely to face those times when we are trapped, when we are pursued, when we are confined. Lord, not to lean on our own understanding or our own plans and ideas, but to go to you for the place of escape. Pray, Lord, as we go into circumstances this week we've never been into before, that, Lord, you will lead us. And if it is not wise for us to do something that in our opinion and our looking at it seems to be such a vital thing, such a caring thing to do, Lord, then may you guard us also in this, that we may be kept safe by our God. But Lord, wherever we go, wherever we are, may you always be present with us.